Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have you on board again. I'm seeing that there's a few people starting to sign up, so we'll wait till they come on board. But in the meantime, g'day Stephen, g'day Manuel. How you going?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Nat. Good to be back again.
Yes. Thanks for joining us again on the spot. And Manuel, we'll go through the formal introductions in a moment. But what's happening in your world at the moment?
I decided to come into Parramatta today. Beautiful sunny day, and just incredible to see all the development happening around here. New South Wales government just moved to Parramatta with some offices, so it's exciting to be in the new spot.
Great. And with the context of COVID and et cetera, accessing your office, everything's starting to slowly get back up to speed again, or is it still reasonably quiet there?
No, we will be sort of the last ones. You know, public service can work from home for a lot of what we do, and so we'll try and make that a really slow one.
Yeah, cool.
So still very quiet.
Yeah, and I see Stephen, you're working from home too?
Yes, yeah. I normally work from home, so it's not. I'm based in the Barossa Valley, as you know, so I work from home a fair bit. So it's part of the normal routine for me.
That's great. And maybe next time on a nice sunny day, you can take us outdoors with the valleys in the background.
Always happy to take us through the valley.
Yeah. Okay, so yes, welcome everyone to another session of On the Spot. I took last week off. I had a few things to attend to, so thank you for my colleagues for jumping into that, Emma, Sarah, and Stephen. This week we're going to be jumping into sustainability drivers and green claims, so a continuation from some of the discussion from last week. But I also wanted to introduce Manuel Wirik, who's our first external person to join us on the spot and just share his views around LGCs and the processes around how they're generated and how eventually they're used to offset carbon emissions and so forth. But we'll get into the mechanics around that in a moment. But just quickly, so Manuel Wirik comes as the project or the program manager for GreenPower. So where he manages the New South Wales side of the ARENA demand response program, as well as the LGC auditing and certification process for renewables. So one of the things that we're really keen to have Manuel on for is that a lot of the drivers that Flow Power are pursuing in terms of a clean energy future is very aligned with what Manuel's focusing on at the moment too. So I might get Manuel to just quickly introduce himself, where he's from, and yeah, we can go through the webinar.
Great, thank you very much, Nathaniel, and thank you very much to Flow Power for having me, or having GreenPower on the call today. We've been following these on the spot webinars for a while, and it's really good to be part of it. I enjoyed last week's webinar as well, which was a really good introduction into environmental claims. Just a quick note about who we are. So GreenPower is the only government accreditation scheme for voluntary renewable energy in Australia, and we've been existing since 1997, so we've been around a fair while. Obviously, it wasn't always me, but I've been with the program for a number of years now. We are a national program. We operate out of New South Wales government, but we operate nationally, and we are supported by the different jurisdictions, state and territory governments, through a national steering group that makes the decisions for the program broadly. People in the audience might know us from their retailers' sort of offer pages or websites. GreenPower is available from most retailers in Australia, and is available to anyone residential all the way to large industrial customers. So our role broadly as a program is that we are here to provide assurance in the renewable energy market, so that customers that purchase renewable energy from the grid, from their retailers, are sure that what they're paying for, what they're getting, is actually also supplied on the other end. And we do that through really rigid auditing of LGC surrenders to protect any customers and also the retailers themselves from greenwashing claims. So that's a really important role there. Yeah, over back to you. I hope that was a short introduction.
That's great. No, that's great. Thank you very much, Manuel. And like I was saying, guys, earlier, there is a real alignment to the work that Manuel does in this program, because ultimately GreenPower is working towards a carbon, a net zero future, which is totally aligned with what we're doing. And the thing that I'm quite inspired by as well is that Manuel's also involved in that arena demand response program, which is something that FlowPower has been involved with for the last 3 years too. So it's interesting how these dots connect. But Stephen, again, welcome back to the session. Maybe for those that didn't jump in last week, did you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself and maybe just some context to what was covered last week?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nathaniel. Yes, so my name's Stephen. I'm an account manager based in South Australia in Barossa Valley with FlowPower, and I've been with the company since earlier this year. So my background is certainly not in the compliance and regulation or legislation area of this. It's more practical experience. My role was Sustainable Development Manager in the last business I was at. And we were on the other side of the coin, where we're sort of trying to navigate our way through transition to renewables and making claims and, providing some assurance or understanding what we could claim, what we couldn't claim. So it's I suppose, a practical understanding of consumers' challenges.
Absolutely, which is a massive help for us at FlowPower too.
Yeah, no, it's always, it's a very complex field. And it's something that you're learning, and it's great to be talking to Manuel here today. And and some of the build up to this, it's been a very enlightening sort of session. Okay, so look, last week was a very high level introduction. We looked at some of the products, basic flow of LGCs, or what an LGC is in some case. And we sort of always understand with these webinars is people joining with very backgrounds, and some people are really starting with the basics and trying to get a handle on what renewable claims are and LGCs and how they would manage it. And at the other end, we know we've got some very experienced people out there and know a lot of the systems and details. So last week was really just to set the scene, and this week we're very happy to have Manuel along, just to go a little bit deeper into one of the aspects and one of the ways that people can manage their claim, and that's through the GreenPower program.
Absolutely. So Stephen, did you want to jump into the first poll and get an insight as to where our audience sits?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, we've got people from a varied number of backgrounds, and we really do try and get a bit of an understanding where people sit. So we've got a number of questions here, and I'm sure we did think of having an option all of the above, because people take all of these points into consideration when they are thinking about a move to renewables. But this is a forced choice, so we want people to vote for their most important driver when they're maybe thinking about renewables or starting off their program. So yes, whether you're first of all is just supporting renewables, that's capacity, bringing additional capacity to the grid, etc. Having the second one is having a link to those sources, whether it's very important to you to be signing up to a specific project, or whether you're just really happy to take them from any renewable source. Whether you want those projects or that source to be in your local community, and whether you're sort of trying to stimulate investment or projects in your local area. You might be focused on renewable energy, but it's more as a overall goal of decarbonisation or carbon reduction in your business, or like a lot of people, it helps further your green credentials and your marketing image with the public. So I'll just let people go ahead. And
so it's interesting because last week it was very much trying to there was a few comments around it really does depend on what the drivers are of the organization to pursue credits and what to do with them, and etc. And so those ones were key examples of what we usually hear of when our customers or clients tend to pursue carbon reduction opportunities or projects. Okay.
Yeah, sure. we've got some results there, and that's really interesting, actually, supporting the renewable pipeline. So this is an issue that we'll take up a little bit later in the presentation as well, because I suppose fundamental for what everybody's doing, they're trying to build some capacity into the grid and support investment. So I think that's great.
Yeah. The interesting thing I find about with that survey too, Stephen, is if we were to look back potentially a few years ago, probably public image and PR was a big driver towards some of the larger organisations in terms of because that's what their customers wanted, and there was a demand out there for their service providers and their products to come from a more sustainable source. And so it's interesting to see that it looks like a lot of the industry has gone beyond that now, and it's more about how can we contribute to sustainable energy, how can we contribute to a clean energy future, and that seems to be resonating with some of these responses too, which is great to see.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
oh, sorry, Manuel, just go ahead.
Yeah, no, just wanted to also highlight, so from our perspective, it's always interesting to see that both emissions reduction and support for renewables are really strong. I guess emissions reduction is sort of an overarching goal, and then supporting renewables as a really tool to get us there, and a way to transition us away from fossil fuels. And there's a lot of confusion in the market around what is a carbon offset and what's the difference between that and renewables. And so it's really great to see that discussion is progressing and that people are starting to distinguish a bit more between those as well.
Yeah, sure. But it is interesting, there's still 20% of people focused on local organisation, local communities, and stimulating the economy. So that's pretty interesting in itself. It would be nice to tease those out a little bit further. Unfortunately, we can't do it in a single poll, but and like I said, there's probably people who are trying to tick off all of those points in their strategies.
Yeah, naturally. Okay, so guys, going back to our typical or our usual discussion quadrants or matrix, as we've referred to it. So again, we're looking at the front of the meter side and what's happening with the markets when we're talking about the context of LGCs. And so while behind the meter projects do generate LGCs, and you can utilize those to obviously claim an offset or a carbon reduction, a lot of the projects that we're talking about in the context of today typically sit in that larger utility scale development side. But yeah, again, in terms of having to distinguish them both, there's not much of a difference here, because ultimately LGCs get created for every megawatt hour that gets generated. So yeah, moving on from there. So just we'll jump into the first slide now in terms of the context, and we are revisiting some of last week's information. Now, Stephen, I'll get you to go through this one in terms of maybe continuing from where we were last week and what we're going to delve in deeper today.
Yeah, so sure. Just as a bit of a recap, and these are certainly not full levels, but just 4 different approaches to the way people are engaging in the renewable industry. So the first one is where people take an offtake agreement, for instance, from a solar farm or a wind farm. They'll commit to the black energy, but not necessarily to the green energy, or the LGCs and certificates associated with that energy. The second one is where they're buying LGCs. They might be, again, buying them straight from the development, or they might be buying them through the market, and and using those to further their claims. The third one is when they're doing both. So if they've entered a PPA, they've taken the black energy, they've taken the green energy, or the LGCs and the title that sits with that renewable energy. So they're in quite a strong position there to substantiate their claims and link them to a source as well. The third one is where they're doing both of the above and using that to reduce their carbon footprint, or claim a reduction in their carbon footprint. And if they're buying offsets, carbon offsets, and it can basically reduce the number of carbon offsets that they need to buy annually.
Great.
Yeah,
And
and
so
that fourth one is really interesting, where people sort of top up. So they try to avoid emissions as much as possible in number 4, and then sort of top up to 0 emissions with carbon offsets for that remaining little bit.
Yep.
Like we said last week, we've got to bear in mind that they're two different schemes, and quite often, you know, when people are talking about renewable energy, they talk about carbon reduction. Yes, they're linked, but you sort of need to be a little bit careful about any of the claims that you make around your two programs.
Yep. And so Manuel, if I can ask the question, where does typically GreenPower sit above these 4 options, and are there others as well that are not listed here?
Yeah, sure. So, like Stephen very, adequately described, the first option, you don't purchase any of the environmental claims or benefits. You basically purchase energy as if you were using it from the grid, and so GreenPower doesn't traditionally work with that. But anything else, the other 3 options that we have there, 2 to 4, where you actually have access to the LGCs, you have access to the environmental claim, you can then use that for voluntary surrenders, meaning that you do more than what is mandated by the government. And so whether it's through a PPA or you purchase those LGCs from the wholesale market, you can, as a customer, do those voluntary surrenders and get additional claim access as well for any of the other options. So it's a really flexible tool, GreenPower.
And I'm not sure if you would see a general trend towards any of the 2, 3, or 4, and in terms of what might be growing amongst others in terms of whether it be size or industry types. As to whether certain industries might be pursuing option 3 in comparison to others, and etc.
Yeah, so I mean, in the public domain and in the media, there have been a lot of announcements from especially public organizations like councils that make commitments to reach targets, but also large corporates and international corporates. For example, the RE100 program is a sort of a program or network of companies that commit to moving towards 100% renewable energy or 0 emissions. Within GreenPower, most smaller customers don't have access to that level of sophistication in how they purchase energy, but we do see a strong move in the sort of larger scale, whether that's corporate or industrial or even public organizations, towards using power purchase agreements, at least for some of their energy use. And then they often think about, so there's still a value to LGCs and selling them into the market instead of surrendering them voluntarily. But we do see a shift as the price of LGCs comes down, which has already reduced by over 50% in the last 2 years.
Yeah. And without speculating, the suggestion is that might continue, but yeah, we'll see how that happens over time. Okay, so Stephen, can you give us a quick overview then? So looking obviously between those options, there's obviously 2 big ones being renewables through PPA and surrendering LGCs. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the differences between the 2?
Yeah, sure. So, look, the first one, was the root of a fair bit of discussion last week around, I suppose the value to the industry of entering PPAs and not taking the LGCs. So, look, we certainly, support that, because it's very important to any developer who's got a project in mind that he's looking to place that energy that comes off it. So without a PPA, it's much harder for him to get to financial closure or have some certainty to invest in those products. So that's a really important step in this whole transition to renewables. So we're very supportive of companies that take that route. When you look at the commitment for those companies, also they're taking the generation risk on the output. They're taking a risk around the pricing over a long time. It could be 10 years. So then hopefully they're getting it at a pretty good long-term price as well. So there's some advantages in taking this approach as well. But then for a lot of companies, it's quite a significant financial undertaking, and then to buy the LGCs on top of that is probably a step too far. And a lot of the companies might have a long-term strategy as well, and initially buying the black energy up front is the first stage of the strategy, and in future years then they'll start to source the LGCs that come along with those. So you know, within the RE100 that Manuel mentioned before, that companies make a commitment, and they might make a commitment to be 100% renewable. We're talking about the larger enterprises here, you know, to be renewable within 10 years or 15 years, and this is often just part of that strategy and a step along the way. So, you know, we're supportive of that, but then, you know, we're always cautious and talk to those customers about what claims they should be making around that, and certainly steer away from any claims about being, you know, 100% renewable, for instance. But certainly, if they want to make an announcement that they have entered into an offtake agreement with, you know, wind farm A or solar farm B for X amount of the year, that'll match their annual intake. You know, they're sort of factual claims rather than being claims, green claims. So that's quite a little bit different. Manuel, maybe you might want to make a comment about that.
Yeah, look, from GreenPower's perspective as an accreditation scheme, it's really important that customers especially, but also providers or retailers are aware that a statement like "I'm buying renewables" sort of creates a public perception that that would include the energy or the green energy or the certificates as well. So anyone that says things like "we're buying renewable energy from a wind farm or a solar farm," that we would expect that they would have that voluntary surrender or the LGCs within that PPA as well. And I thought I might also just quickly touch on some of the other drivers that companies see or customers see. There's in addition to reaching targets and emissions reduction, there's also other schemes that recognize green power specifically as a in other ways. So one of those is, for example, building ratings. A lot of corporates or building owners want to achieve sustainability ratings for their buildings, whether that be offices or other sites. And GreenPower is a really effective way to increase those ratings and make the tenancy more attractive to be rented out as well. And we also are considered under climate active in carbon reporting, as well as voluntary things like B Corp, which is a sustainability and community focused certification for businesses. So really for leaders and for businesses to show their commitments.
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot of those sustainability ratings are becoming a lot more intertwined now, where they are complementing each other. By targeting one, you are essentially being able to take benefits in other areas as well. Yeah. So okay, so we'll move on now from explaining those differences to the next slide. Okay. So we've made a slight adjustment to this one, but this is also a continuation from last week, guys. But now the focus we want to just quickly go through is essentially the flow of those renewable claims, starting from the renewable energy source. So again, Stephen, would you mind just giving us a quick overview of what this flow diagram is essentially saying?
Yeah, sure. And first, I'll open up with a little bit of a disclaimer. It's a very sort of complex system around generation of LGCs and retirement and the flow. We've tried to summarise it in a very brief, high-level flow diagram. So it certainly should be taken in that context.
Yep.
What we've done is tried to separate the actual flow of the certificates, the physical certificates and where they reside, and any transfers from the maybe the title claim that might be associated with those LGCs. So to start with, through the generator will produce the energy and generate the certificate. The title of that will pass on to the retailer, because in our instance, Flow Power would have the offtake with the renewable generator, but then they would be registered in the REC, and ultimately we would pass those on to our customer if they were buying the black and the green energy together. So then we would pass them on to our customer. Our customer would then, with the title, our customer would ask us to retire them, and we would retire them in the REC. So then they would be able to claim those LGCs. The other alternative is that if they don't want to take them, they're passed into the market. And other people who haven't bought their energy, who are just relying on the certificates to substantiate their claims, would be in the market, along with other people with the mandatory requirement, which would be, say, for instance, retailers or large emitters. And maybe Manuel, you might want to talk about the GreenPower's role in this process.
Yeah, certainly happy to. So overall, GreenPower works across all the different PPA options as long as LGCs are involved. GreenPower looks at the whole value chain as well. So initially we look at generators and we accredit generators to make sure that they meet our program standards, which are slightly stricter than what you'd find in the market, accredited by the Clean Energy Regulator. And then we also look at the end of the process where we check that any provider or retailer that customers purchase GreenPower from actually do the right thing in terms of surrendering the accurate amounts of LGCs. And we do that through a two-tiered auditing process. And we also make sure that we check all of the marketing claims around that and how that GreenPower is sold. So that really encompasses the assurance framework that GreenPower provides and is a really valuable thing for a lot of customers. The second point that people can use or benefit from is that we also offer marketing tools. So any GreenPower customer can use our customer logos, and we provide support with how that environmental claim can actually be made to really reduce any risk of greenwashing claims or any other sort of wrong public perception of that. Yeah. While we're talking about the markets, thank you, Stephen, for dipping a toe into that really complicated market space. So it is complex. GreenPower sort of recommends that people, especially corporates, use international carbon standards for the way that they report on their efforts and commitments, and also on their annual performance. So the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has an international carbon reporting standard, and GreenPower and other reporting schemes work really well within that, like Climate Active or the ENGA scheme. So there's a little bit of work there ongoing with updating everything so that we have one standard way of doing that.
Yeah, which will certainly help simplify, or at least maybe eliminate some confusion from the process.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I think the the GreenPower model is great, because a lot of businesses don't have that level. They don't have the resource to actually be checking international carbon standards, etc., and reporting against them, and that's not a major driver for the business. So if they can tap into a scheme that provides that insurance, then that's incredibly important for those businesses too.
Yeah, particularly one that's independent and incredible. So yeah, definitely good work there on all sides of GreenPower. So guys, we're reaching 2:30 now, and as usual, these discussions are really high level at the moment, with the aim of instigating a more deeper discussion. So we've got a few questions here, and I might just kick this one off. So Ben's asked regarding number 4. I think that may be slide number 4. Do you really? Oh, sorry. In terms of those four options with the carbon offsets, do you really need to double up on surrendering LGCs and offsetting, or do you mean just offsetting the non-electricity emissions? Maybe Stephen, could you provide some examples there of maybe some of our clients, or maybe in your role in the past, where clients have pursued to purchase GreenPower as well as offsets?
Yeah, sure. And hopefully I interpret the question correctly, and feel free to jump in, Manuel. I think what we're talking about here is your scope 2 emissions. So if you are buying renewable energy, basically the size of your inventory decreases because you've got a much lower emission factor for your scope 2 emissions. So you're buying less carbon offsets as a result, to sort of net out your carbon footprint.
And I think, and Manuel, again, jump in as you see fit, but I think as well, just to support that, it does come down to the individual organisation as well. Ultimately, depending on how far they want to pursue their carbon reduction, and if they are pursuing carbon neutrality, then there may be a gas component there or some other fuel source that they are looking to offset as well. And so just going complete renewables through electricity may not get there. And so they may need to consider those options of carbon offsets via alternative means.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of the carbon reporting protocol, the international protocol that I mentioned earlier, which gives you pretty clear guidelines on how that can be done internationally and where you consider renewable energy as opposed to offsets, because they're calculating things in or you're meant to calculate things in a slightly different spot depending on whether you purchase offsets. That's sort of end of reporting. Whereas renewable energy is usually considered as zero emissions energy, and then you don't need to count the emissions in your total. So yeah, it's a bit of a complicated answer, but there's really good guidance out there in that international protocol.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so Sarah has asked, what kind of end users you will prefer GreenPower, and in what circumstances will you prefer LGCs over GreenPower? Trying to interpret that correctly.
If I can start that one.
Yeah.
Sometimes it depends on the size of your organisation and what other assurance programs and reporting programs that you have. You might already have a very detailed carbon reporting system. So then you might prefer just to retire your LGCs, your scope 2 emissions, and provide that sort of level of assurance yourself. If you don't have that level of resource and you're a smaller company, or really just sort of want to keep it high level, I think that's where the beauty of the GreenPower program really comes into play.
Yeah, and just to add to that, that's also what I mentioned before in terms of the marketing benefits. We notice it from a lot of GreenPower customers that they see a benefit in having that external brand, really giving the assurance, giving the accreditation, and then being able to use that external sort of quality assurance logo as well in their environmental claims and communications, and that can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Bruce has asked, would the speakers recommend any protocols or standards that cover the renewable energy and carbon claims? Maybe Manuel, do you have any off the top of your head? But Bruce will also be happy to write a response in this, because I'm guessing we might be putting Manuel on the spot to think of all the standards off the top of his head.
I noticed Bruce's question a bit earlier and spoken to him before about this. So the International Carbon Reporting Protocol that I mentioned before is an international standard. Not all of the Australian schemes currently work 100% in alignment with it, but GreenPower and others are working on a consolidated position and national approach. So that's all the different types of sustainability and carbon and renewable energy schemes that exist in Australia, like Climate Active, which used to be called the National Carbon Offset Standard, NCOS, but also just the federal government with the Clean Energy Regulator are all involved in that discussion to make it easier and to really create a standard approach to do it, so that claims and commitments can actually be compared. So that's it's a work in progress, because the market changes continuously, but there's certainly a good standard out there that people should try to adhere to.
Great. Thanks for clearing that up. Okay, so Michael's asked a question regarding double counting. Does retiring or surrendering LGCs increase the reported grid emissions intensity factor, or do all NEM customers benefit from renewable energy above the RET?
It's a very good question, and it's a very complicated one. If I just might jump in there, and please, Stephen and Nathaniel, jump in anytime. But GreenPower is looking at how the program can consider what is already in the grid and add it to the grid in a mandated way through the renewable energy target. At the moment, that mandated renewable energy target, most people think should be able to be claimed by every consumer in Australia, because it is something that everyone contributes to as part of their electricity bills. But some states have much higher renewable energy proportions because their local resources are really good, and that's why a lot of the wind and solar projects are located in that jurisdiction. So there is a question about whether it is fair that the renewable energy that people can claim, whether that is state-based or whether that is on a national level. And we as GreenPower don't have a clear view on that yet. That it's still something under development.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up, because you're right, it's still a little bit hazy as to how that all comes together. Okay, so Sarah's asked, what is the surrender period for GreenPower? Is it yearly or quarterly or other? Manuel, would you know that one?
Yeah, so GreenPower runs surrender audits on an annual basis, but providers and customers can also ask for their LGCs to be sort of moved in the right Clean Energy Regulator account where they are stored until the end of the reporting period. They can do that on an ongoing basis, but we need to have it all, and we do our auditing on an annual basis, which is when we really look at all of the sales that happened, all of the LGCs that are there for surrender and their origin, where they come from, and make sure that everything's done correctly.
Okay. So we're getting a few more questions here, but I might just finish off with one from Patrick, and thank you, Ben, Sarah, Bruce, and Michael for sending in multiple questions there. But I'll just jump onto Patrick's one as the last one here. We've seen a number of 100% renewable claims from corporates partnering with variable intermittent generators. There may be times the corporate is using power when the generator isn't producing power. Is this accounted for? Or is purchasing the LGCs for the equivalent amount of power, no matter when the energy is produced, enough?
Yeah, I think part B. So generally it's done on your annualized load. So if you look at or for the reporting period, if it's annual, how much you've used over that year, how many LGCs that you've retired. So it's very hard, to make it link in 100%, and it's probably the only way that a sort of certificate scheme or title scheme could actually operate.
Yeah,
it's a very good point, Stephen. It's quite a difficult thing if you imagine that. Flow Power is very experienced with that. I think some of your products in the renewable energy space and offtake agreements designs are quite sophisticated. And like Nathaniel mentioned earlier in this webinar, things like demand response can be a really crucial way of matching that up. Maybe do you, Nathaniel or Stephen, have any comments about how that kind of load matching works in PPAs and what you recommend people do?
Yep.
Yeah.
Steve, did you want to give a quick shot at that?
Yeah. Okay. And again, if I interpret the question right, look, we spend a lot of time looking at PPAs, our load profile of our customers relative to the generation. A lot of our customers will, maybe the large ones, have three types of offtake. One might be behind the meter, where they've installed their cells, that sort of covers off their base load directly. Then there'll be an amount of wind and amount of solar, and we try and match those to give a bit of a hybrid system that closely aligns to the usage pattern as much as we can, and that takes some risk out of the supply as well if they're exposed to the wholesale market.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to support that, one of the primary reasons why we do match the renewable energy generation profile against the load profile is the more we can do that, the less risk that the customer takes on board in terms of taking on too much export risk or taking on too much oversupply. The other thing is, as well as Manuel, when we are providing these virtual generation agreements too, we have a GEA factor, a GEA number, which is a generation efficiency adjustment number, and the idea of that is the GEA number is directly related to generating electricity when demand is high, And so the more you can the more you can generate when demand is high, the greater the GEA number. And without getting too scientific and complex about it, there is a numerous number of ways you can improve the GEA, whether it's sourcing the right project to suit your profile, or whether it's getting a combination of diverse projects to match your profile. But ultimately, that's a big driver for us to ensure that it does matches the user's load. And then 2 weeks ago, we spoke about price efficiency adjustment, which is the PEA, which is the demand side. And so when you have the GEA and the PEA working together, that produces the best outcome for the customer. But we won't go any deeper than that, other than you're right, it does get a little bit sophisticated, a little bit complex, but there is a purpose to trying to achieve the right balance between supply and demand. So guys, yeah, the questions are still coming through. We'll definitely look to revisit those offline. But for now, I would like to thank Manuel for jumping on board as our first guest on the spot. So thank you very much, Manuel. Yeah, your expertise in this discussion has been really useful. And Stephen, yeah, enjoyed you having on board again, and I'm sure you'll be able to jump on another time as well. But thanks everyone for dialing in again on the spot, and yeah, we'll catch you guys next week. All right, thanks all.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Cheers.